Good morning, everybody. Welcome on this beautiful sunny day to our fifth HoW Talent bedroom sessions here. I'm really pleased to welcome you back and welcome if you're new as well. I hope you managed to get a pew in the garden and not stuck inside like me. Gutted because I just had to close the bedroom window here. Otherwise, you'd be drowned out by birdsong, but it's all good. So this morning, it's all about training and upskilling. Do you know what? You can have the best tech in the world, but if you don't know how to use it, it's pretty redundant. Just ask my mum with her smart TV. So it's really, really important with tech. It's important to make sure that you understand it's relevant, that it's fit for purpose for you, that you understand how to use it, the purpose, and you've got access to training and support that's relevant for you when you need it as well. So with that in mind, I'm really pleased to introduce a special guest. Special because she's super full of knowledge, but also because she's part of our Job Train family here. It's Holly. And Holly, quite apart from being a crack implementation manager here at Job Train, also used to be a client of ours. Holly both implemented and trained Job Train at Odeon Cinemas, and she trained it out to the whole organisation. So I think there's very little that Holly probably doesn't know about training and upskilling. So I'm going to invite her on screen now and let's have a chat. Before I do get started and invite Holly in, please do ask questions. There's an ask questions bit down here. We'd love your questions. Ask us anything at all. And also don't feel like you've got to scribble down notes through this session, because straight after it, we'll send out a copy of this webinar. And also, if you haven't managed to view it first time round, and we'll also send out a little article as well, just covering some of the topics that we've discussed today. So, and also one other thing, if you've enjoyed this session, please do share it out with your networks, spread the word. These sessions are available for everybody's benefit. And of course, if you've got any feedback as well, do get in touch with me. So without further ado, I'm going to see if I can invite Holly on. So let's have a quick look. There she is. Right. Let's invite her on. Okay, a moment of truth. Are you there, Holly?
Hello.
Good morning again, because we did a little trial run earlier, didn't we?
Yes, we did. Yeah.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us. Thanks for sharing a few hints and tips. Before we get started, introduce yourself to everybody. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, you've done a lot of that already. That is, I guess, me. I now work for Job Train. I am the implementation success manager. So I work with a lot of our new clients and roll out their new systems, work out what they need, make sure it's all ready and they are comfortable and ready to go. Before that, I worked in the client success team. So some of the people and some of the names on this list I recognise from being the client success manager. And as Giles says, before that, I was a client. So basically, if it's something to do with Job Train, I've probably looked at it in a different angle. I'm a big advocate of the system.
Cool. Right. We've got just half an hour. So let's get stuck in. So I've got a few little notes, crib sheet notes down here and that kind of thing. So if we start off with considering training, what are the key things that you need to bear in mind when you're thinking about rolling out and training tech? And, you know, that can be it doesn't need to be ATS or Job Train specific. I mean, it's really any piece of technology within an organization.
They're kind of the same as any other kind of training, really. The first most important one is preparation. So stop, have a think about what the end objective is. You know, if you're wanting to make sure everybody's trained to a certain date, you need to work backwards from that date. There is always an element of commitment in any kind of training setup. So you need to make sure that you've got the time to be able to do it. It's great wanting to train people, but if you just don't have the time at that time of the year, of the season, of the quarter, that's probably not the best time to be doing it, because without the commitment, you can't get the training right.
And I guess that's a wider commitment as well, in terms of not just you doing the training, but also the people that are going to be receiving it as well and getting their buy-in and commitment. I mean, how best do you go about that?
From experience, I've found that the more people you've got from certainly in a wider organisation, obviously Odeon was multi-site, from a wider organisation, your early adopters, your key people, and your loudest people, the ones that tend to have kind of almost a following. So your more senior team, if you've got the senior team bought into the system, if they're actively wanting to use it, if they're actively talking about it, it can really help with rolling out a new system. Certainly making sure that you've got as many people as possible aware that the new system's coming on board. Communication is always key in any kind of implementation, any training system.
I couldn't agree more. I think that the times where the worst thing you can do is take people by surprise that there is a change coming and that there is a new system coming, because sometimes the people are quite fearful of the fact that, oh, suddenly I'm being asked to do something. There's something else I've got to learn on top of my day job and all the other tasks that I've got to complete as well. So I think communication and a bit of expectation setting is probably quite important up front.
Yeah, expectation settings, rolling out, this is what we're rolling out, this is what we're planning to roll out. And also it's more around pitching it the right way, because it's well and good saying, we're getting a new system and you're going to have to learn it. But really, it's more about talking about we're getting a new system because it's going to save you time doing X, Y, Z, and really pitching it the right way and piquing people's interest. So not sending War and Peace out, but a couple of snippets about, the cool things in your system that you're going to be rolling out can start to get people asking about training.
Yeah, I agree. I think, if you're introducing anything that's new, you've got to somehow communicate and convey the relevance, the positive impact it's going to have on their daily lives or their tasks and that kind of thing, but also probably how it's going to empower people as well. So they're really clear about that up front. So they are at a point where there's an appetite, there's an openness, there's a willingness to get involved, adopt a new piece of tech and also be trained on it as well. And in terms of that training itself, Holly, I mean, there's obviously lots of different formats by which you can deliver training, whether it's, both a sort of a trainer-to-trainer approach, whether it's video content, whether it's written user guides, or content that people can dip in and out of as and when. What works best and why and where?
That very much depends on the organisation, on the culture, on the people that you're trying to train. If you've got a team of people that are used to face-to-face training sessions so they can workshop it and work around best practice with their peers, then that will probably work best for you. You can't just hand a user guide to people and expect them to know what to do with a new technology if maybe their technological skill set isn't there. So I would always consider your culture and how you roll out your training usually, but also, if possible, provide a couple of different options of training kind of software, of training equipment for the team. So whether it's just a user guide or whether or not it's a user guide, a couple of training videos, maybe a chat, even an online chat with your early adopters, your brand champions, your project team about why things are set out that way, or the best way of using it for your organization can really just bring out the training in a much more effective way.
Okay, I'm just having a quick look at the chat stream here, and I think that some people are struggling to hear you a little bit. Is there any way you can move your microphone just a little bit closer?
Yeah. Is this any better?
Can we all hear Holly? Just a quick message will do.
Is better? Right, fantastic.
Right, thank you. Thanks. Oh, there we go. Right.
Sorry
so it's just draped there.
I'll just hold it. It's fine.
sorry to interrupt you mid-flow. All right.
No,
so
not at all.
Use a format that's familiar to people. They've used it before. They can get to grips with it. It's not going to require sort of any particular change in terms of approach and that kind of stuff. Moving on.
Oh yeah, preparation there as well. If you've prepared your training fully with your guys, you've probably spoke to your key stakeholders about what's going to work best for them. So you'll have that kind of indication from early on.
Yeah, so that circles right back round to the start of this conversation. In fact, there's been a common theme that's run all the way through these series of webinars, and a lot of it is about stakeholder engagement, and it's preferably senior stakeholder engagement as well. And then that passion, that enthusiasm for this change or this new piece of tech or even existing piece of tech is then cascaded down through the organization to instill a sense of excitement and buy-in as well before you start training and stuff. Yeah. And in terms of that, if we look at in terms of how training is rolled out, what are the different approaches that can be taken around rolling out training, or even rolling out a system for that matter, from an implementation perspective? And what are the pros and cons for each?
Okay, well, traditionally we would do elements of the implementation process face to face, just because it's a lot easier to work with someone where you're sat next to them. Obviously, in the current climate, it's a little bit more difficult. So we're doing a lot more virtual implementation work at the moment. So things like scoping, we would typically have kind of half a day session with the project team and make sure it's all boxed off in kind of a day. Currently, we're finding that just isn't appropriate for obvious reasons. So we're holding a scoping session to identify the requirements, but then maybe revisiting them over the next 2 or 3 weeks over little training sessions, little demos. So again, it all comes back to being very, very fluid, having a lot of tools in your chest to be able to flex around people's needs. Face-to-face, whilst it can be really, really helpful, if you're not particularly good at technology, or if it's just not your skill set, sometimes having a training guide in your back pocket to share with people as part of your training session can mean that people can write their own notes and write it their own way. We tend to provide an editable training guide so that you can put it in your language. You know, if it's not written in the right way, if it's not using, so for example, you don't use the phrase hiring manager for the people who are creating, you use the phrase recruiter. If a training guide's written in our language, it might not work for your organization, because, you know, the easier you make it for people is really the bottom line. The more you can give to people to make it easier, the easier the training will, or the more successful the training will be.
And I guess in terms of making it easier, it's not just about making it easier for the people that are receiving the training, but the people that are going to have to roll it out as well. And I guess with that in mind, I think it's probably fair to say, don't be afraid to ask, or you should be engaging with your vendor to ask them, do you have example user guides and that kind of stuff? The last thing you want to do is sort of reinvent the wheel, start with a blank sheet of paper, which can probably quite overwhelming in terms of, you know, what do I do and how should it? You should expect some support from your vendor on different types of training, and even within, you know, different customers or different sectors or different types of organizations. Some might be quite centralized, some might be quite, you know, disparate in terms of, you know, people operating from different locations, and that's probably never truer than right now. And I like your tip about something that people can dip in and out of, because let's face it, being able to run a classroom session, which is a doing session about people actually, you know, going through tasks and completing them, it's just out of the question at the moment, and it's going to be for the foreseeable. And the same is if you run a session. One of the reasons why these webinars are sort of half an hour long, because if you sat there sort of staring at the screen, you know, your attention's going to wander. But if you've got something that is shorter in bite-sized chunks that you can dip in and out of, then that's probably going to have more of an impact and probably, you know, stick in the memory a little bit more as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, wherever you can do guided training, it doesn't necessarily have to be before you're using the system. It's not unusual nowadays to have things like bots. Obviously, we've got our lovely Howard, and a lot of clients are kind of almost testing their functionality that they're rolling out by giving people access to the system, asking them to get in there and have a play, maybe use the tools available, the user guides or the bots, and seeing how intuitive that system is. Because if it's not intuitive, if you've got hiring managers, for example, who maybe aren't recruiting that often, they're going to have to return to the user guides or their training. They're going to have to be retrained. It's all additional time. The test for a really well thought out and planned and rolled out system is it's as intuitive and as easy to use as possible. So it shouldn't need that much training for your day-to-day processes, or there should be little pointers or little tips and tricks as you go through the process, so you don't have to revisit a full training session before you start using the system.
You touched on Howard. Then it's probably worth explaining. Within these sessions, we don't talk very specifically about job train, but it might be worth touching on, our approach to Howard and the specific tool and tips and that kind of thing, and how we hope that's going to help around user engagement and understanding.
Yeah, okay. So Howard is our little bot, and he can walk you through a lot of the day-to-day processes in the system. So you can ask him to help you create a job or add a new location into the system.
Yeah.
And we have clients who have given access to the system at UAT phase or at very early launch phase with their early adopters, and said, right, okay, here's your login, crack on. I want you to create a job. Please, can you use Howard? He's that little man in the bottom corner, and he'll talk you through it. And they've got hiring managers who've come back to them and said, I haven't struggled at all. I've done it all the way through. All I've done is use our little Howard friend, and he's talked us through it all the way. So that's a really good sign, because the overcomplication of processes can sometimes be where the training will fall short, rather than it follows a logical flow for your hiring managers.
Yeah, that is a good point about relevancy, which is something I mentioned sort of in the intro to this. The solution, or what people have access to and what they can do, has got to be relevant to the tasks that they're being asked to complete within the system as well, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. If it doesn't make sense in a day-to-day world, then it's not going to work. I mean, if you walk all the way back to right at the beginning, we talked about preparing. It comes back to it again. You've got hiring managers who it's not their day job to recruit. They just want people to work with them. And if it's not easy to use, it's actually adding extra work on, and that's taken away from the day job. And 9 times out of 10, that's what your hiring managers are there for, not to do the recruitment. We like to get them involved. We like them to be engaged, but the easier you can make that process for them, the more engaged they're going to be with the system, and the more they're going to want to use it rather than circumvent the process you want them to use.
Yeah, I guess it's the last thing you want people to be doing, and especially right now, where I think we're a centralized system of record in the form of let's say an ATS is probably more important now than ever. Firstly, everybody's then got visibility, everybody's following the same process, everybody's following a consistent process, and from a compliance perspective, that's important as well. From a GDPR perspective, so making sure that you're not sharing data outside of that system, it's critical that people are engaged and using the system that you've selected. On the subject of hiring managers, I think, as you've already highlighted, you're naturally going to have some hiring managers that are recruiting all the time. You're going to be others that only recruit once every blue moon. Not every provider is going to have, or every user is going to have access to some kind of a bot type functionality that walks people through. No. How do you solve the problem of people that aren't accessing the system regularly, in terms of them having confidence to use it and actually using it as well?
There's a couple of ways. Making things available on the intranet or equivalent, or making things available quite quickly and easily to your hiring managers can really help. But also having kind of wider brand champions, training champions. We at Odeon had regional champions for using the system. When we rolled out a newer version of the system, we needed to make sure everyone was comfortable. A lot of the a lot of our managers weren't, they'd worked for the cinemas for kind of 30-40 years, and they just weren't technologically competent. Their skill set wasn't there, so their natural go-to was to be quite negative about change with technology.
Right.
So as well as your early adopters, who were your high volume, your recruiters, the ones who just got on with it, we included a couple of those kind of naysayers in the brand champion list, so that they could tell us what was rubbish, and we could talk them through the best way of doing it. And it worked really well, because if someone's going to shout about a system, they're going to shout about it whether they're happy with it or not. So if you can get that voice pointing your way, you're winning. So it's just about listening to, your key stakeholders, identifying what their struggles are, and trying to find the best and easiest ways to roll those back out as a positive.
Yeah. So a couple of points on that. I think it's also fair to say that, you should very reasonably be looking to your vendor or your tech partner to play a part in that support and making sure that help's available when it's needed. What are the best approaches around that from your perspective? And firstly, what should your reasonable expectations be from a tech vendor in terms of the kind of support that's available, who it's available to, and in what kind of format?
I think initial support should always be there. You should always have someone available to you who will not only support with the technological setup, but also, experience of other clients or the industries, best practice, who can share that kind of information with you and point you in the right direction, really. There should be an element of training, and training up till the point that you feel that you're comfortable with your system as well. Obviously, I'm sat here working for JobTrain now because of the support I received when I was a client, and therefore I wouldn't consider not doing that for our new clients, because it's how it should be. In addition to that, you should have a moving forward relationship with your vendor, with your supplier, to make sure that what you've got is still fit for purpose, and that if you've got a query about, we're thinking about changing our process to maybe do this slightly differently, there's someone there who can talk it through kind of strategically with you to identify your needs, your requirements, and the best way to change that as well. And then finally, just as much kind of day-to-day support as you need as well, whether that's, again, online training or it's just a quick phone call with someone just to say, I can't remember where I had a location, and I just need that extra little bit of support.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to come back to hiring managers briefly, because as we all know, you're going to have some that are really keen to adopt a system and some that aren't. And we had a little bit of a catch up before this session. I'd always been in the mind that when you start to train out, it's quite a good idea to pick some early adopters, people that are typically quite keen on using tech first, and then use them as a platform to share out the good news and almost act as a kind of internal evangelist. But you adopted a different approach, Odin, didn't you?
Yeah,
She was really interested in me.
I'm not scared of a challenge, basically. And I think if someone's going to tell me something's rubbish that I know for a fact is not rubbish, I want to know why it's not working for them, because if it's not working for them, there's a chance it's not working for someone who maybe isn't as open and as vocal. So we spent a lot of time with a group of people that we had who maybe weren't comfortable with the system, asking them, okay, so what's not working for you? And it was little things like, it's taken me days to shortlist people, and just little things like being able to point out the automated processes that we've got in place that will speed things up. And if you do that as a group of people, you're less likely to get people not listening, because it's a bit more public. And a lot of the time you will find a group of people who have concerns tend to have the same concerns, and if you can highlight them as a group, they start to open up about more concerns they might have had, or someone else starts to kind of say, oh, actually I sorted that by doing this. And you can quite easily turn a group of people who are almost shaking their pitchforks at you about how terrible it is that you've given them a system, to actually turn it round into a working group to develop and build and make a system really positive. And if you've got a team of people that are willing to share that information, always use it, because the more feedback you get on your system, the better you can make it overall, and the more engagement you have from people. And certainly if people feel that you're listening and you're willing to make the changes that, within reason, obviously, that you can make, the more that you're going to get people shouting about, actually, this system isn't that bad, and I've found a new way of doing this. And they will bring the team along behind them, because they are vocal and keen. So it's
Yeah,
much better to keep in
I like that, and I like the fact that what he's saying is, in terms of rather just sort of having training or a system foisted upon somebody, you know, it should be an open line of two-way communication about, you know, feedback and how people are finding the system, that kind of thing.
No
Which
one
to sort of
likes to be
lead,
told what to do.
yeah, I certainly don't. I'm really bad at it. Just ask my wife. So I guess we talked about sort of implementing, rolling out systems and that kind of thing. I'm conscious that time does fly on these sessions.
Yeah,
Once your solution's live, it doesn't stop there. And I think it's important around constantly revisiting the scope of the solution that you've got, how it's set up, what kind of supporting materials you make, and ensure it's almost like a constant process of refinement. But what other tips do you have about once the system's live? And this is not specifically just around training, but also around upskilling. So obviously you'll probably get to grips with the basics quite quickly, but then sometimes you'll get used to the system, and perhaps there's loads of other features that you haven't used, and perhaps you want to get more out of the system. What are your approaches and suggestions around that, both from a sort of a training perspective, but also working with your chosen vendor point of view as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's never stopping moving. You can never, as with everything, you know, you set something up, you train it out, you roll it out. You've always got to review and keep that cycle going, because it's so easy to stagnate with something like this, and the technology changes so quickly and so fast that you need to stay in touch with your vendor wherever possible. If you are having regular catch-ups with them and identifying where you're at with your objectives, how you're achieving those objectives, if one of them needs changing, work with them to identify, you know, what can you do to support us changing those objectives? How can we achieve our next 6 months goals? And also listen when the team is saying, you know, we've got this new functionality. Ask them about it, talk to them, and get demos, because 9 times out of 10, if you've got a new objective and they're suggesting a new technology, actually the return on investment of a new module can be vast. You know, little things like the onboarding module can really save so much time. The return on investment's really worth it. So it's communication, it's staying in touch. If it's kind of 6 monthly, yearly catch-ups, understanding what's changed, what's available, what's new, that you can look at, see if it's going to work for you, but constantly reviewing, making sure your objectives are still matching your requirements, talking to your hiring managers, very much like Nathan was saying last week on the session last week, making sure you're not biting off it too much at once is useful, but putting a plan to not just talk about a phase 2 and it doesn't quite go over. Trying to commit to that and getting it prepared is really, really, really useful, and it's a good way of upskilling the team as well. If you involve the team and your feedback, hiring managers, for example, you can really identify where you might want to change those objectives for the future.
Yeah, agreed. I think, you know, right at the start of a piece of tech implementation, you probably got some kind of focus group or stakeholder group and what have you. And I think my advice would be to keep that group together, to revisit the solution with that group, but also create some protected time, actually plan some protected time in where you can revisit the enhancements that are made to the solution that are quite often, you know, made available free of charge. Make sure you revisit the scope of the solution, make sure it's still relevant as well. I know even from, you know, some of the systems we use internally at JobTrain, you know, you'll see it'll pop up, or this new feature's been added and that kind of thing. But how often do we actually make sure we create protected time in order to properly investigate those things and work out, are they relevant for us? What kind of impact are they going to be? Are they going to further empower us or engage our users and that kind of thing? Are they going to deliver better efficiency as well? So I think it's making sure you do create the time, you do invest it as well, but make sure you've got a really engaged partnership with your vendor. There's always a bit of a tricky one that I want to ask you about quickly. I'm conscious that we've got about a minute to go, so I'm going to speak quickly. As you have new starters joined, I know that over the years, I've seen a lot of users really struggle, or you get to a point when people get a bit frustrated with the system, but because you've had new starters join, or sometimes even a whole team over time has sort of changed, but that they don't have the confidence in the system, they haven't had the training that they need. What's your advice or tips around that, either internally or again sort of using your vendor?
Never ever presume, really. With a system, it's very, very easy, exactly like you say, you know, team changes, turnover, it can really stop development. And what you do find is if people don't have that that proper training, they find ways of using the system which can then affect things like consistency, reporting, all sorts of things. So again, it's a very common theme all the way through. If you've got your training prepared and communicated out right, if it's in the right ways and it's intuitive, you can then share that in regular ways. Snippets, communication, making it part of your induction or your onboarding can really, really support that upskilling. It can be really essential when you've got a process that's and certainly reports that are very reliant on consistent use of the system, to make sure that people are consistently using the system. So we have, you know, we've got clients who ask hiring managers as part of the approval process. So when they're creating a job, one of the queries they get is, are you comfortable with using the system? Have you ever used it? Do you want more retraining? We've got clients who send out system alerts to people when you've got candidates in the system with top tips of how to use the system.
Brilliant.
Of the process. That kind of consistency can really make sure that you know, you're getting the best out of your system on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
And
so ultimately, sorry.
Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
If you were going to change your process, if you're going to look at updating objectives, the way you use the system, making sure that those user guides, that training material is still relevant, up to date, it's going to fit the needs. Because if you don't tell people that you've changed and they don't have access to how to use the new ways of working, they aren't going to do them.
Yeah, I really like that point of it. To almost, you know, make sure that help and support or guides are available right when you need it. So, you know, if a job's going through an approval process, making sure there's tips or guides or links out to training material. And I think there is absolutely a responsibility on the vendor or provider side as well. And I know that quite recently we've run these HoW sessions internally for our clients for a number of years now. And they've been obviously webinars that people can dial into and join, and they're quite instructional in terms of this is how you use different parts of the solution. But then that requires people to be available at that point in time and able to dial in and what have you. And that isn't always the case, especially now when we're living quite sort of a disrupted environment. You know, I know that Laura's next door at the moment for you, and she might come in at any minute.
I'm seriously hoping whatever she's watching is going to
but it's prompted us to reevaluate how some of our guides are available. And I know that we're making sort of video guides, we're making video guides available almost as a library that's accessible. So I think, again, work with your vendor, find out what training is available, what guides are available, how that can be accessed. And if it isn't or they aren't, then do apply a little bit of pressure. It's absolutely, speaking from a vendor's perspective, it's critical that our users feel confident in the usage of our system. They've got access to the support when they need it. Because if they don't, then ultimately a piece of tech just becomes a bit of an expensive white elephant that sits in the corner that becomes a bit unloved, unused, not benefited from. And then ultimately there's only one conclusion to that. You know, the two are going to part their ways. If somebody's using a piece of tech and they're not getting benefit from it, or they don't understand how to use it, they just dump it. It's just human nature.
It's exactly the same process as, you know, organization to hiring managers. They're your key stakeholders. If our clients don't have the training, the support they need, why would they use a system that they don't get if it's not doing what you want?
Brill. We've run over time. I knew we would, but I'm really grateful. This has been such a cool session. I knew it would be. I hope that everybody that's joined us this morning has got some value from it. I know there was a few people struggling to access the webinar, but I think everybody's on. There's one question here from Sue about how our existing clients can get access to Howard. Answer is part of our brand new release, and we are in the process of starting to introduce the new platform, introduce Howard, and roll that platform out to all of our clients, so everybody will automatically have access to both the new platform and to Howard as well. Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Aru, for joining us. If any of you got follow-up questions for me, or let's face it, more likely Holly, because she's the expert, then do get in touch with us. I'm happy to field questions. Giles at jobtrain.co.uk. As I said, copy this webinar will go out straight after this. Please join me again, if possible, for next week's session, where I'm going to be looking at how to deliver a killer candidate experience, but not on my own. I'm doing that with Dave Alstow, who is the Client Services Director at our Friends, Buddies and Next Door Neighbours Cree Communications. So they know all about candidate experience and engagement. So that's what we're doing next week. Please do, if you've enjoyed this, I'm really pleased, share the links out amongst your networks. You know, this is available for everybody. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoy the sun. Take care, and see you next week. And thank you, Holly.
Thank you.
Bye.